What are the actual chances that this conviction gets set aside? And how come the prosecution just signed off on the sentencing delay? I would have thought they would have fought this thing.
Yeah, it's not clear to me, Steph. Let me take the second part first. It's not clear to me that they signed off on the sentencing delay, at least all the way to September. I think they were willing to take a little bit of a delay for briefing on the question of whether to set aside the verdict. Whether or not September was a surprise to them, we'll learn, I suppose, at a later point in time. But as to the chances of this setting aside the verdict, I think it's a non-frivolous motion based on how transformative the Supreme Court's opinion was. And in particular, there's a portion of that opinion that says when an act is official, not only can you not prosecute it, you can't even use evidence of it to prove someone's knowledge or intent or anything else for that matter in a case having to do with purely private conduct. And that's the thing that the Trump lawyers are really focused on, because in that hush money case, some of the evidence that came in, for example, evidence of Trump's admissions that he was reimbursing Michael Cohen, that came in the way of tweets that Trump issued in May 2018. They also admitted an Office of Government Ethics financial disclosure where Trump made the same admission. And there are other pieces of evidence having to do with the period of time that he's president, not just the checks that he wrote, which I think we could argue are, and agree probably are private, that he wrote them from his private account. The only connection to his White House tenure is that he wrote them in the Oval Office. But there's a series of pieces of evidence and testimony that more credibly relate to his tenure in the White House. That's the basis for Trump's lawyers arguing the verdict should be set aside. I don't think they'll win, but it's not a crazy idea on their part.
All right, Hans, let's talk about the politics here. What is the difference between a July 11th sentencing and September 18th if you're the Trump campaign?
It just gives Trump a little bit more time to totally own and state manage his convention, because the previous sentencing date was right before the Republican National Convention, when everyone's going to be in Milwaukee, and it would have sort of crowded in. Still trying to figure out how to use the phrase non-frivolous. It's a non-frivolous disclaimer to the actual convention. I don't know what a non-frivolous motion is, but I want to yield all my time. Clearly knows her stuff a lot more than I do.
That could be the case any day, every day, and certainly tonight. Hans, Lisa, let me move from frivolous to non-frivolous in that, is there a chance come September 18th, they could argue it's too close to the election, we got to move it again?
I don't think so. And that's because there's no policy in the New York court system or otherwise that would prohibit a defendant from being sentenced. The Trump folks often make a lot of hay out of the Department of Justice policy that says within 60 to 90 days of an election, you don't take overt steps in any investigation. But that doesn't prohibit, for example, a trial from taking place, or for that matter, a sentencing from taking place in the state system. I think if on September 18th, Judge Merchan has ruled against Trump's motion to set aside the verdict, you can count on that sentencing to take place then, unless we've got some other unforeseen circumstance. And given who we're dealing with here, Steph, that's not something you can count out either.
McKay, we are already seeing talk about how if Donald Trump gets back into office, it would be an imperial presidency. How does this immunity ruling play into the goals of Project 2025?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a moment when the nation would really benefit from a political party that was authentically dedicated to limited government power and the rule of law. Unfortunately, we don't have one of those right now, at least not the one that nominated Donald Trump as their presidential nominee. Look, Trump has always had authoritarian impulses. He brags about it. He doesn't make any secret of it. In his first term, the people around him were a mix of advisors who were egging on those impulses, like Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon, and self-proclaimed adults in the room who were trying to keep those impulses at bay, right? In a second Trump administration, according to everyone I've talked to in the president's orbit, he would make sure that the people who are helping him would be people who are obedient, who are on the same page as him, who want to help him accomplish his agenda by any means necessary. And this ruling just makes it that much easier for him to kind of bulldoze through the guardrails that were in place up to now, and to do what he wants to do in a second term. And I mean, I do think that it's important to note that a lot of the Republicans who are celebrating this decision are Republicans who not that long ago were on TV berating Black Lives Matter protesters or illegal immigrants in the name of rule of law. And I just don't see a lot of rule of law conservatism at work right now in the response to this decision.
All right, well, let's go into the time machine and go back to 2021. And I want to share why the top Senate Republican, Mitch McConnell, opposed impeaching Donald Trump over January 6th. Just in case we forgot. Watch this.
President Trump is still liable for everything he did while he was in office as an ordinary citizen. Unless the statute of limitations is run, still liable for everything he did while he was in office. Didn't get away with anything yet. We have a criminal justice system in this country. We have civil litigation. And former presidents are not immune from being accountable by either one.
Yet was yesterday. Hans, is that whole argument now out the window?
Was no longer operative according to the Supreme Court. I mean, the civil liabilities may still, I mean, again, I'm going to yield my time to Lisa, but, you know, Mitch McConnell was not prescient. He knows a lot about politics. He knows a lot about the Supreme Court. He clearly didn't know which way the Supreme Court was going to rule on this idea of immunity or absolute immunity for official acts. So the big caveat there for what Senator McConnell, I think then he was the majority leader. No, he wasn't, 2021. So then still Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. He wasn't making a distinction between criminal and civil. The court clearly did. And the courts make a distinction between official and unofficial acts. But again, I'll yield to Lisa here. I still don't know what constitutes an official act and where the gray area is. And I certainly don't think Mitch McConnell knew at the time. But that's just a question I have. I don't know.
Lisa, Hans is looking for an upgrade. Can you finish this off?
I think Hans is going to have to continue to look because, Steph, look, this decision enunciates some really basic principles, but it certainly doesn't offer a whole lot of guidance. It sort of dumps a big mess in Judge Tanya Chutkin's lap and says, it's up to you to assess what's official versus private. And it certainly says that, for example, she should look to the context and the content of what's going on. But then there are other things that they say she can't look at all. For example, she can't look at what former President Trump's motive or purpose was in executing certain actions and evaluating whether they were official or unofficial. So the reason that he does something is something she's supposed to put purely out of her mind when applying that test. That doesn't give her a lot of guidance as to what should count and what shouldn't.
McKay, I keep thinking about your last answer and sort of that original conservative party and what they stood for. Because this immunity ruling was, yes, it was about Trump's past acts, but we need to think about the future. Because the next Republican president is going to be much more like Donald Trump or will be Donald Trump than your old school conservative Mitt Romney, who you know very well. So how do traditional law and order Republicans feel about this ruling?
Well, Republicans who still believe in the original principle of law and order as it's commonly understood, I think are very nervous about what this decision portends. First of all, because Donald Trump, at least at the moment, seems, very likely to be the next president, or at least it's highly possible. But to your point, Stephanie, whoever is next is probably going to be in Trump's mold. And if you have a president who is already coming to the office with strongman tendencies, authoritarian impulses, and the backing of an increasingly authoritarian conservative base of your party. And now you have this entirely new universe of leeway where you don't have to worry about any kind of, criminal action, criminal fallout for your actions in office. it creates a lot of, it creates a lot of concern. And I think that right now would be a very good time for those Republicans who do authentically believe in law and order to be speaking up, whether they're in office or not in office anymore. This is a crisis moment, I think. This is one of those moments where we need to hear all those voices come to the table. I know a lot of Republicans that you're talking about are sick of responding to Donald Trump. They think that their voices are drowned out, that nobody listens to them. This is a moment where I think that the nation would benefit from hearing from them. It can't just be liberals and Democrats who are panicking about this. We need to hear from across the political spectrum on this issue.
I think my recommendation to is for him to have some interviews with serious journalists, you among them, a serious journalist, no holds barred, any questions fair, and just sit there and be Joe.
Nancy Pelosi had a very clear message for President Biden today, and he appears to be listening. Tomorrow, the president will meet with Democratic governors for the first time since the debate. And on Friday, the president will sit down with ABC for an extended interview. The goal is to calm panic within Democratic ranks after the debate and reassure voters that he is still the best candidate to beat Donald Trump. My colleague Kelly O'Donnell has more.
Tonight, President Biden's political future at the center of a storm.
We're going to face a tough summer.
As his only public event today focused on extreme weather and emergency management. For 5 days, the president has not answered reporters' questions.
Mr. President, will you drop out of the race?
He has relied on scripted remarks using a teleprompter.
We've invested a record more than $50 billion.
The White House said today it wants to turn the page after a debate performance crisis that some Democrats say has raised questions.
I think it's a legitimate question to say, is this an episode or is this a condition?
Today, the first public call to exit the race from a House Democrat.
We must call on him to give the ultimate sacrifice of saying that he will step aside because that's the best way to save our country.
Another Democrat with a warning.
I just want him to appreciate at this time just how much it impacts not just his race, but all the other races coming in November.
At the White House briefing today,
he had a cold and a bad night. I would not see this as an episode.
Under repeated questioning, Karine Jean-Pierre defended the president as physically and mentally fit.
Is anyone in the White House hiding information about the president's health or his ability to do the job day to day?
Absolutely not.
The New York Times reports that in closed-door meetings, several current and former officials noticed the president increasingly appeared confused or listless or would lose the thread of conversations. New tonight, NBC News reports that first son Hunter Biden joined meetings with the president and senior staff this week in the West Wing. Reaction from senior staff described as, what the hell is happening? The White House had this explanation.
He came back with his dad from Camp David. He walked him into the speech prep, and he was in the room.
With me now, Jennifer Palmieri, former White House communications director for President Obama, and Michael Steele, former chairman of the Republican National Committee and former lieutenant governor of Maryland. But you know him as the co-host of The Weekend right here on MSNBC. Jennifer, how do you feel about these steps that the campaign is making and just your thoughts overall?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is like... been through not been through quite this, but been in it. And the campaign's a difficult situation. So let me try to say like where I think we are just, as objectively as possible. So I think the campaign has done everything they can do to position the president to get out of this. And now it's up to him, right? They announce on Tuesday, he's doing a interview on Friday, right? That sort of locks people in. You're not going to have more people like Lloyd Doggett say he should drop out because people are going to wait to see how he does in this interview. He has meetings scheduled for tomorrow, the thing with the governors. He has travel scheduled to go to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania later on in the week over the weekend, right? And now it's on him to do well and to deliver. But, I'm not saying he is in a very serious situation. Okay, this is a very serious situation. But I think people are wrong on a couple of fronts, to jump all over polls as evidence that there is a serious problem from which he needs to be removed from the ticket. We are less than a week away from the actual debate, right? There are people who were very animated about the CNN poll that had the vice president doing 2 points better than the president, both in both directions against Trump. That's in the margin of error. That poll probably happened 72 hours after the debate. When someone's not a candidate, it's very hard to actually pull their strength, right? We should be paying attention to numbers around the president. Everyone's going to hate to hear this, but I think it's going to take at least 2 weeks until you have polls that you can actually trust. All right. So, the president's abilities is one question. How it's impacting the race and, whether that means he should leave the race, that's a separate question. And I think we've got to wait on polls. And the second thing is, I think people have a sense that you can just flip a switch and turn a $2 billion campaign over to someone else. This is a campaign that was built for Joe Biden. Okay. So it's not, whoever the successor is, first of all, it's not as if you can just flip a switch, because you have millions and millions of dollars of polling and advertising that's all built around telling his story. The vice president is very much part of the story, but if she's a successor, it's going to be a little different, right? And, that takes a long time. The other thing is, this successor, whoever it is, if there is one, obviously, right now there's zero indications that there will be, that person needs to be set up for success. How important is that? Okay, pause to think about that. This is not something we rush into. So, you want to make sure that, that person, that the transition, the handoff is done well, even just in terms of introducing them to the public, convincing the public that this is the right choice. So all of that, if and the most likely thing still is the president continues to be the nominee. But if this does happen, this is sort of the sequencing to keep in mind, so that this is as orderly and as smart as possible.
Michael, I see you nodding, and I want to be clear to our audience. We are not suggesting that President Biden step aside and someone else were to be chosen. But I want to stay on this last point that Jennifer was making, because lots of folks out there are saying willy-nilly, he needs to move out and somebody move in. Help us understand that. You don't just take $2 billion worth of campaign dollars built for Joe and slide it to someone else. If there were to be another person, you'd need to actually set them up for success. It's not like saying, you stepped on my foot, I'm going to choose somebody else for the next dance.
No, it's not. And it's a great deal of effort, because whomever that person happens to be, and first I'll just for the record say, I think this conversation at this stage is way out of bounds of where this thing ultimately is, for a whole host of reasons. But okay, let's play. I think the reality is basically one where you have to look operationally how you do that, how the DNC makes that shift, how state parties make that shift, how candidates in certain states may now be affected by this person at the top of the ticket versus Joe being at the top of the ticket. So there are a lot of variables here for the Democrats that have to go into consideration. You just don't swap out a president, 2 weeks or a month before their convention with somebody else, and then think you're going to run a national campaign against a candidate like Donald Trump. And just one other thing, I was looking here as you were talking before. National head-to-head polls pre-debate had Joe Biden down to Donald Trump 43 to 46. Post-debate, it's 42 to 46. He lost a point since last Thursday. Take a chill pill and understand that a lot of what we saw is already baked in with a lot of Americans. The Washington class, trust me, I know these SOBs better than most people probably should know anything. They hyperventilate at the least unimportant thing and they go hog wild on it, and they try to whipsaw a narrative out there until everything is taken into consideration and settles, and then you get a better, clear landscape view of where things are. Between Thursday and today, Joe Biden has lost 1 point in average national polling. And so if this was hell on fire, burn the walls down, 10 alarm fire for the campaign, that number would be a hell of a lot bigger than 1 point. So let's see how the president does in the next few days. The American people are the ultimate ones who will decide whether Joe Biden stays or go. That's the conversation he and Jill will have.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.